Next up is Senator Luján. Senator Kane is not here, so we'll go to Senator Luján, followed by Senator Johnston if he returns.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our ranking member as well. And appreciate you being here, Mr. Raskin, and your work in this space for bringing attention to a hearing, namely about emissions and avoiding accountability. One thing, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to say off the top here is I don't understand why this is a controversial statement or not agreed to by all colleagues in the Senate and in the House and around the country, around the world. Climate change is a serious threat to our well-being and to our economy. The devastation that we're seeing all around us every day and around the world, I don't understand why that is something that there'd be disagreement upon. So I appreciate this hearing for several reasons. Now, first off, Mr. Raskin, to solve this problem, our country made serious commitments with the Paris Agreement. And importantly, major oil and gas companies, including Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and Occidental, are all on the record voicing their support for this Paris Agreement. And many of them have told me personally about their commitment in this space, and also their commitment to reducing methane emissions in New Mexico. Now, these companies also know that our country cannot meet our Paris commitments without addressing climate change's root causes, including reducing methane emissions from the production of oil and gas. Now, Mr. Raskin, based on your findings of your investigation in the House and Chairman Whitehouse's more recent work in the Senate, yes or no, did some of these companies privately say they didn't have plans to meet their public pledges?
The way you worded it is a little difficult to say yes or no, but I would say yes, they certainly indicated that they had no serious intention to meet these goals. I don't know if they had plans not to, but they certainly lacked any intention to get there.
I appreciate the clarity and honesty in your response, Mr. Raskin. Now, currently natural gas is delivered with harmful and wasteful methane emissions that come from venting, flaring, faulty valves, and outright abandonment of wells. Now, this is a problem because methane is many times worse for the climate than carbon dioxide. And 1/3 of the methane emissions in our country come from oil and gas supply chain. Now, what's concerning is that companies in this investigation have known that their methane emissions are a problem for a long time. My question, Mr. Raskin, yes or no, have these companies consistently said the same thing about methane emissions in public that they have in private?
No.
Some methane emissions come from accidental leaks, but many come from outdated industry practices that don't reflect how impactful methane emissions are to our climate. Mr. Raskin, given what you've learned, yes or no, have these companies downplayed the serious climate harms coming from methane emissions in their supply chains?
Yes. If I could add one note, methane is 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So the idea that natural gas is the panacea for what ails us in carbon emissions is just a pure fantasy, and everybody knows it.
Now, one concern that I have that it appears this investigation has shed light on is that it's more clear that oil and gas companies are not acting on their own with enough urgency. Now, in the rapidly growing Permian Basin in southeastern New Mexico, methane emissions are an urgent problem. As a matter of fact, if you look at satellite imagery of the United States, there's a big methane plume over New Mexico, arguably two, but they aren't anywhere else. New Mexico is not the top producer in the country, but we have the worst methane plumes. What's going on? So when I sit with these executives and ask them about their commitment to reduce emissions in New Mexico, everyone says they'll do it, but nothing happens. The methane plume gets worse and worse and worse. People are getting sick. What about the health constraints that people that live in proximity to these areas that they can't see the gas, but they're breathing this stuff in? What about them? So a recent study showed that New Mexico inside of the Permian emitted twice as much methane per unit produced as the other basins across the country. Now, I'm very proud that in New Mexico, there's action now being taken. In 2021, there was an effort by the state of New Mexico to lay out a blueprint that is now being looked at and used by the EPA. Now, Mr. Raskin, I have several other questions in this space, and I'll submit them to you on the record. But again, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you bringing attention to this issue because I'm speaking about it not just from the seat as a United States Senator looking at what's good for America, but what's happening to the people that elected me to represent them. And the nonsense that's coming from, I need to be careful with the words I'm using, Mr. Chairman, because there's a lot of emotion in what I am trying to share here, Mr. Raskin. But when one of us, any of us across America, ask someone else a question, especially dealing with the health impacts to our constituents, and they lie to us, what are we supposed to do? And I'm sick and tired of not getting the truth and people dying that are just trying to farm, trying to grow up in these rural communities, Native American communities, and people just are not being honest with them, man. And it's just not right. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate this hearing very much, and thanks for calling them on me.
Thank you, Senator Luján.